However, there seems to be more mental health problems as we progress forward as a species, and that begs the question of why. And we explore that today amongst a host of other things of what depression and anxiety is, how we find ourselves with depression and anxiety, and look at some of the other solutions of how to get ourselves out. We're getting some real deep stuff today. It's really beneficial, and it's been really important for some people to listen to this. And even if you don't suffer with depression and anxiety, you can definitely take something away from today's episode where you can help somebody else in your circle and in life who could benefit from the information that you learned today. So, in line with that, if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, forward it onto someone you think might be beneficial from it, or take a screenshot of your phone and bang it on your Instagram story or your Facebook story or whatever your social media platform of choice is. I'm going to leave you to it. Enjoy today's episode.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, Amanda.
Hi, Connor.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So, for anyone listening who has had a previous relationship with me and collective fitness, and you kind of understand a little bit what we're about, we have a major interest and alignment with mental health. And we always want to look at ways that we can help people not only feel better, look better, but be healthier on a mental scale as well, and improve their, inverted commas, mental fitness as well as their physical fitness. So that's why we've got you on the show today. So in real short, simple way, one paragraph, who are you? What do you do?
Obviously, I'm Amanda. I'm a therapist. I'm in private practice, been so for quite a few years now. Yeah, and work with all ranges of depression and anxiety.
Okay, cool. So we've had a relationship for some time as well. We know each other. I personal train you, so we have we've had many conversations over the past 12 months about how the relationship between exercise and the relationship between exercise and mental health, not just exercise and not just mental health on its own. So that's some of the things we're going to explore today and get into in a little bit. But we are also going to look at depression and anxiety just in real black and white terms. So for anyone who, obviously depression and anxiety is massive at the moment. It's very, it's becoming to the very forefront of our lives, and it's becoming a lot more acceptable and a lot more talked about. So for a lot of people, they're seeing all this information and they're like, okay, I don't really understand this as much as I should, and as much as some other people do. So today's episode is going to really dive into that and really look at that in a black and white way. What is it? How can we help people who have got it, and how can we help ourselves potentially if we have it? So in layman's terms, what is mental health?
Mental health is achieving a state of emotional and behavioural comfort, if you like. In other words, that everything feels in sync, that we don't really think too much about how we're coping with things. We know that actually everything feels comfortable. That's the optimum state of mental health.
Cool. We've spoken about a few times now how everybody strives for happiness, but like content is kind of where we want to be. And I think whenever we've had conversations, what I've always took away from that is being content is probably the ideal descriptive term for like having good mental health.
Absolutely. I mean, so many people get caught up in this belief that being happy is the ideal state. But of course, happiness is just fleeting, as is, so many more of our emotions. It's wonderful to be happy, but it's not what sustains us.
Yeah.
We can't remain happy forever because life comes along, stress comes along, all sorts of things happen to influence how we're feeling. Happiness is a feeling, whereas contentment is a place where actually, no matter what goes on in our life, it's a bit like a tree in my analogy, that we can bend with whatever comes our way, but actually the trunk is the thing that keeps us secure.
Okay.
That's contentment.
I like that. That's a good explanation. Yeah, because like when we always look at happiness is always very much like that on a scale of 1 to 10, it's that like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 in position. But really, have you met many people in your life and in my life, I know I haven't, that were consistently 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10?
No.
And you don't, do you?
No.
So that's why I think sometimes people miss the trick a little bit. And obviously you're the expert, so correct me if I'm wrong, where people strive for that constant 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 position, and then fall short of that and feel unhappy about that, where actually we should be looking to be at a 7 out of 10 content position consistently.
I think it's the word. I think people expect to be happy, somehow thinking that they're achieving good things in their world, rather than, using the correct word, which is actually if they feel content, that in itself, is enough.
Yeah.
But that confusion of the word happy is not a state that we can remain in constantly.
Yeah, it's
it's a feeling.
Yeah, not like...
It's not a state of being.
So that's okay, that's an interesting point. Explain that for me. What's the difference between a state and a feeling?
Oh my goodness.
That's a big question.
A feeling, feelings come in and out of our world. We feel joy, we feel sadness, we feel grief, we feel hurt, we feel lost, we feel confused. All those feelings can come in and out of for some people in one day.
Yeah.
We can have all those feelings. So I can be working with a client and feel really sad for that client, and I can come out of a session with a client and somebody will have delivered me a card saying thank you, and I'll immediately feel happy that I was able to help that person. And then I'll go and realise I've got to go and walk the dogs, and actually, they're jumping all over me and I'm feeling a bit cross.
Yeah.
I'm feeling all those different emotions within half an hour sometimes. Yeah. So the state of contentment is that, as I say, that underpinning of knowing that actually we feel, without even thinking about it, secure in whatever's happening. We have the capacity to be able to handle those feelings, and to put them in their proper place in our psyche.
I suppose that, the way, what I took from that then is the state is like the start of our day. So when we get out of bed in the morning, our state is kind of like the foundation to our day. And then you can imagine, let's say we have like generally quite a stressed or anxious state. Our then feelings that kind of stack up throughout the day, like you just mentioned, will lean more towards the more unfavoring emotions of agitated, frustrated, stressed, anxious, as opposed to if I wake up and the underpinning of my day is contentment, my emotions and feelings will then lean more towards the side of happiness.
Absolutely.
Joy. Joy. Oh yeah, that's cool. I learned a lot from that then.
If we're feeling very low, or we've in extreme had a bereavement, for instance, we're going to be in a very low grief state. So we're going to wake up and actually not be able to think, if I open the curtains, is the sun going to be shining? We're just going to be thinking, I don't know how to get out of bed today.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay,
and everything will react from that.
So then, okay, we kind of understand what mental health is now. What is, by your definition, what is depression and what is anxiety, and how are they different, and how do they intertwine, if they intertwine?
Well, depression is for me, not living our lives in a way in balance, I think. Okay. It's not feeling that it's very difficult, isn't it, actually, to think of a phrase where I could sum up depression. Yeah. It's a sense of low mood. It's a sense of not living our lives the way we want. It can be
I suppose it's very
interesting.
It's very perceptual, isn't it? Because for one person who has depression, the way they would describe it could be a million miles from how the next person describes it.
And because you get such, vast states of depression, you can get depression that's very mild, where your mood has been low for a time. You're seeing the world in a very negative light. Everything feels impossible. Everything feels a bit overwhelming. You can't make good choices for yourself. And you can have that, and it can just be like a gnawing feeling that your world isn't okay, but you can't quite work out where you're at with it. But you just know you're not happy. But then you can go to the extreme depression, where you're suicidal, where you're feeling actually there is no hope to be had, that life is impossible, that life is too overwhelming, and that you don't know how you're going to survive.
Yeah, I think...
And there are many, many states in between.
We were we were just talking about 5 minutes ago before we started the podcast about perception, weren't we? And that's one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later in the podcast, but that's quite relevant to what you just said, because I suppose a really black and white, probably oversimplified way of explaining it would be someone whose perception is constantly leaning more towards the negative side of things. So obviously we all have different events that happen throughout our day, and sometimes you can have one event that happens that multiple people have to experience, but I could experience that my perception of that event could be really, really bad, whereas you could have exactly the same event happen to you, and your perception of that event could be quite optimistic, and it would not bother you in the slightest. So I suppose a really oversimplified way of explaining it, who's someone whose perception is constantly bad of events and challenges. Would that be a good way of putting it?
Well, I think that their observation of life is that it's challenging, it's difficult, and they feel out of control.
Yeah.
A lot of people with depression feel they have no control over their world.
Like a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. Whereas
So then-
anxiety is a state of fight or flight.
Right. Okay.
That's our sort of our century-old biological way of keeping our species alive. That actually, as soon as we're under threat, our adrenaline kicks in. Everything kicks in to sort of pump all our muscles up to get us ready.
Yeah.
Our heart starts racing. We get the dry mouth, the feelings in our tummy, the pins and needles. This is nature's way of saying, we need to fight the foe. So we get ourselves prepared for it. Unfortunately, in modern day society, we don't have to fight, I always say dinosaurs, and I know that's ridiculous, because dinosaurs, we never had to battle dinosaurs, but, it's fighting the foe.
The saber-toothed tiger.
But how we are, beautiful description, but how we are faced with today's challenges, they elicit the same response. That this is really stressful, that I feel under threat, that I feel like I need to either fight this or run like hell. So we still have the same physiological, biological response, which creates that sense of panic.
Do you think then, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's popped into my head and I think it would be beneficial for a lot of people. Do you think that because of now our lack of exposure to really challenging events, that all of a sudden when we do have a really challenging event, like a bereavement, for example, that's when we fall into these states of depression, because like you just made the reference back to caveman times, is that probably on a daily basis we had something really bad happening to us literally on a daily basis. So then now we don't have these really severe things happening because we move through life in a more safer environment, and all of a sudden something happens like a bereavement and it affects us way worse than it should have, to a certain degree. Is that fair to explain?
I can understand. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Yeah, it's not, our day-to-day life isn't life-threatening. Yeah, whereas in caveman days it was. We don't have that life-threatening situation in our normal day-to-day life.
Then again, I suppose on the flip side of that, how can you, what I'm saying is actually, are we unprepared for life? But how can you prepare for something that is going to really catch you that much off guard? Living your life in anticipation of really negative events is actually then another negative way of looking at it, isn't it? So that kind of isn't hypocritical in itself. One thing that we always hear quite commonly said is that anxiety is worrying about the future, whereas depression is worrying about the past. Is that right, or is that very oversimplified?
I think it probably is a little bit oversimplified, because I think depression, yes, it's often come from events in our past which we haven't resolved, we haven't come to terms with, or we know are there and actually haven't got the courage to face. Sometimes we don't know what's created our depression. Sometimes it's not until we're in therapy and we begin to unpick it that we realise the sort of, the burden we've been carrying for such a long time and not made sense of. We've just assumed that we're depressed people, negative people, not good enough people. So we carry the baggage of the script that we've gained from our life so far, and never really examined the script. We've just assumed that that's who we are.
And I suppose we've only ever lived our script, so there's no
Exactly.
real way of us being oh wait, so that wasn't the normal thing to have happened to me.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, we've spoke a lot about when people have had massively traumatic events in their childhood, but they don't really, you know, deep down somewhere, some part of their psyche knows that that was a really bad event and a really bad thing. But in a like plain frontal view, they're like, oh, that shouldn't have happened to me. That didn't happen to you. And I suppose that's when people then like, they suffer later on in life. And that's when...
And it's not, I don't think usually until adulthood that we may even begin to challenge that actually how I'm feeling doesn't seem to sit, or, you know, look back and realise the events that happened in your life weren't perhaps so great.
Yeah.
Although many people normalise it, you know, it was normal for them, so they never seek to question.
But I suppose that's when it gets quite dangerous, isn't it? Because then if you have something really negative happening in your childhood, and then you normalise that, and then you're going to pass that down to your generation, then aren't you? And that's where, like, you can imagine like how now we are developing as a society, but then like later generations now, people in their you know, their 50s and their 60s who have had bad things happen to them when they were a child, because society was a little bit less developed than it was now. So they're having to kind of like process a lot of this stuff, and that's something that we've spoke about, is how people of that generation are really often, they struggle, but they don't know they're struggling. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think absolutely.
So, you know, this kind of segues nicely into it. One of the things that, like, I suppose I was taught early on when I started to kind of look into what mental health was and how that relationship with exercise and so on and so forth, is mental health issues like depression, anxiety, is this a biological problem? Like, is there something wrong in our brain? We kind of already know the answer to this because we just spoke about it, but I want to go into it a little bit more. Is it something wrong in our brain, or is it something wrong in our environment, or a combination of both?
Well, I think that goes back to nature nurture, doesn't it? You know, and there are many studies about our biological, you know, our mental health, the chemistry between the two, and there's an awful lot that says about serotonin is a huge impact on, you know, our brain chemistry, how that impacts our well-being, our mental health. I personally believe that, while I agree with that, you know, everything that's out of kilter in our bodies will affect our chemistry somehow. Yeah. Same when we have panic attacks, you know, the anxiety attack, how our bodies try to protect us, and using the adrenaline and the cortisol that floods our system makes us feel out of kilter. It has an impact. It takes us a long time to come down from that, you know, those chemicals flooding our system. So we have to sort of settle and rebalance. And I think it's the same with serotonin. You know, it's working out why we feel the way we do, and then learning to settle and rebalance ourselves. However, I'm also, from a personal perspective, very aware that our nurture, how our lives began, how our childhood influences, any traumas, any experiences that we've had, have a huge impact on how we see ourselves, on how we see how we fit into life, of how we learn to react to things, of how we learn to see things, fear things, assess ourselves, have a huge impact on, when we get to adulthood, our confidence, our self-esteem, our belief about whether we deserve good things to happen to us, bad things to happen to us, you know, how we fit into the world, and whether we do fit into the world.
I think what pops into my head then, as a PT, obviously, you know that I have so many in-depth conversations with clients, and one of the main, like, there's the whole notion at the moment, not at the moment, like it's like there's two sides to this conversation, where being overweight, when like fat shaming, that's what I'm getting to, when like, why are you overweight? You know, all you need to do is move more, eat less, and people put that really simple solution forward without thinking about the bigger picture. And what I now know as a coach, and especially over the years, is that there's way more to it than that. And the reason I reference that is because there was a study done, and there was this guy, and he was trying to do like a big intervention study with loads of very overweight people, and he did this study which they all lost ridiculous amounts of weight on, let them go free into the wild, and then rechecked back in with them at a later date. They'd all put most of the weight back on, some even more so. And then when he kind of explored this and was like, all right, why are these weight loss strategies not working? What's going on? And then he came from a very scientific background. He wasn't just a Joe Bloggs PT like me, so he understood the psychology as much as the physiology. And one of the things that he found out is when he actually sat down on a one-to-one basis, not on like a study basis, on a one-to-one, human-to-human basis, is that all of these overweight people had experienced some form of traumatic event when they were a child. So what he said to them was like, okay, when did you start having the weight gain problems? And they would have said, I don't know, 16. What else happened when you were 16 years old? And a lot of them were like, oh, this happened, or this happened, or this happened. And then they will start to stack up these really traumatic events. And that's kind of like, I can't remember why I came onto this point now, but the point is that actually there's such a relationship between the psychology and the physiology. And as much as from a mental health perspective and a physical health perspective, we can say, oh, like, it's a really simple answer, or it's in our genes, or, you know, it's in our brain, we're just a little bit broken. Our outside world has a massive influence on that, doesn't it?
Oh, massive. Absolutely massive.
So what is the difference between feeling low and suffering with depression or mental health illness? Because you know, we all have acute periods of time where we feel low.
I think feeling low is normal. I think, you know, as you say, we all have times where we feel low, just a little bit out of sorts. We don't quite know what's going on, or we can't find a solution to a problem, or we know things aren't quite right, but we haven't yet found that, you know, way through it yet. I think when it persists, you know, so when it goes on for weeks and possibly months, you know, I think when we realise that this has been with us for quite some time, I think, and our life is becoming narrower, and we're noticing that we're not perhaps engaging in the things that we would usually enjoy.
Yeah.
And feeling more reluctant to engage in them, and, you know, the wanting to be home more or isolated more becomes more apparent. I think you can recognise then that person is going into depression.
No, it's not just low. It's,
absolutely.
And it's kind of
they're beginning to become reclusive, withdraw from the
Yeah.
world.
I suppose there's that very like greyed out line, isn't there? Whereas it becomes from low into actually now we need to have something, we need to address it, and we need to acknowledge it. I think one of the beauty for me and about knowing as much about mental health as I do now versus when I was younger is that I, like any other human being, I have days of feeling low, but I very much got a switch now in my mind where I'm like, okay, cool, I feel low, but I have confidence in future Connor, tomorrow Connor, or in a week's Connor, that he's not going to feel low. And that if he does, he's going to do something about it. And that kind of process in itself, that like mindfulness process, often then drags me out of that low state. Or sometimes I can acknowledge that there's a physical reason that I'm feeling low. Like I might be hungover, or I might be a little bit ill, or I've got a cold coming on. And then having that kind of process in my head of questioning my lowness often then pulls me out of it and makes me acknowledge that actually it's just a short-term thing, that I'm actually fine, and kind of we move forward.
I think you have a point there, because I think acceptance is the key.
Yeah.
I think it's accepting that we're not always going to be happy. We're not always going to be engaged. We're not always going to feel okay. Accepting today I feel low is a good thing. You're learning to understand and accept that it's almost giving you permission to say, yeah, no, it's okay to feel low.
Yeah.
I haven't got to feel up and out and ready for everything all the time. It's okay. It's giving me time to think, so why am I feeling low? What do I need to do for myself today? It might be as simple as, do you know what? I've been working flat out for weeks. I'm absolutely exhausted. I haven't been eating very well. This is almost me talking here. Do you know what? Today I need a day where I can confess to my trainer that I'm eating a twirl and I'm sitting on the sofa and I'm not doing any exercise. And do you know what? Today I need that.
It's quite
and not to beat myself up for it, but to accept today that's today. But tomorrow, if I'm still feeling the same, then perhaps I need to address this tomorrow.
It's quite like an empowering process in a way, isn't it? Because it liberates you of like, oh, I feel low. Why do I feel low? Why have I got this guilt of feeling low? And then like you can kind of see where it starts to spiral. Like, okay, I feel low. why do I feel low? I now feel guilty feeling low. I now feel lower because I feel guilty about feeling low. And you can kind of see that chain of succession happens. Where if
You
I'm
can, but it comes from society, which we're led to believe that somehow we should all be on it all the time.
these like weird, happy
So
robots.
the inner
with no-
critic comes in.
Yeah.
The inner critic says, "Oh, well, I'm not being like everybody else. Oh my goodness, there's something wrong with me." And you're right. That's where we go down that rabbit hole
Yeah.
of there's something wrong with me. There's definitely something wrong with me. Oh my goodness, I shouldn't feel like this. And that's probably the biggest thing I deal with in my therapy room, which is
Yes.
I shouldn't feel like this. You know, other people have worse things. Other people this. You know, they're constantly questioning that they shouldn't feel the way they do, rather than saying, "Yeah, I do feel like that.
Yeah.
That's okay."
Someone I know who suffers with mental health quite bad, and a common thing that they've always said is like, like, I'm broken. I'm just a bit broken.
Which
I'm
is an
like,
interesting phrase in itself.
yeah, and I'm like, and it's like, actually, no, we're not. We just need to acknowledge what's going on and kind of reverse engineer that. So anyway, let's get into you. Give everyone a bit of your backstory and kind of like the pathway that has led you to where you are now and doing what you do and serving the people that you do.
Okay. Well, I became a therapist late in life. I was 50. I'm 67 now. Because I'd come to a point in my own life where actually I was struggling with depression, had struggled with depression on and off, probably for most of my life, childhood included. And it was my therapist who suggested I become a therapist, which was interesting. And I know the reason she did that, because my background was very much a very fractured family. There was abuse. There were very difficult connections with parents. I grew up with very low self-esteem. I didn't achieve at school. I had very difficult relationships. I had, disastrous relationships, we could say, which all led to me eventually having the mother of all panic attacks one day in a doctor's office. And luckily, we're talking about the 80s. Luckily, a very perceptive doctor who very quickly got me referred to a psychologist, which started me on the path of therapy. Otherwise, I don't know where I'd be, really. And it was that sort of literally taking apart my perception of myself and who I thought I was, which was, dare I say it, as I laugh now, but I really thought I was, Satan's daughter. I felt so bad. And that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
I really did believe that, because I felt so bad about myself, who I was, what I represented, that I couldn't imagine feeling any other way.
There's something quite empowering in that for other people, because people will meet you, and there's many other people out there like you who have had their own journey and they've come to where they are now, but they'll meet you and they'll be like, oh, you look very in control, you look very content. There's obviously, you obviously haven't had it that hard. Where actually it's complete opposite, and that kind of should empower other people who are in very terrible places to think, actually, there is most definitely light at the end of that tunnel.
Absolutely. I mean, I can also remember when I had what I call my breakdown, which was I was in my late 40s. And at that time of my life, I had 3 kids, 2 teenagers, a young daughter. I was working 50-hour weeks. I was on the PTA. I was wanted people to approve of me. So you name it, I said yes to it. I was running around like a dervish. I always had to look good because I thought people are going to judge me if I don't look good. Had to keep my weight in check, so I wasn't always eating well. Yeah, this whole facade that I was building to try and make myself acceptable to the world. And I was in an office in, used to be an insolvency accountant. So I was in this office one day and all of a sudden thought I was having a heart attack and got rushed to the doctors, and it was the mother of all panic attacks again. And it was, I can remember, not being around for a long time and then going back to take my kids to school and people saying to me, where have you been? And I just told them, I just said, I've had a breakdown.
Black and white.
And everybody was aghast. they said, but you're Superwoman. We look up to you. You're the one that we all think we'd like to aspire to. And I can't tell you how surprised I was, because that was all a sham. I was only doing it so they'd approve of me. I didn't realise I was making them all feel inadequate. Through my own need to feel adequate, I was trying to be so perfect that everybody was looking at me thinking, well, I don't know how she does that.
It's weird paradox, isn't
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I suppose it highlights the fact even more that pretty much everyone out there is fighting their own little battles in a way. You know, you in your head were fighting your battle, but then the people at the school were then like fighting their battle to be like you. But if they'd have known that actually you were having like an internal breakdown, and they probably wouldn't have felt that pressure. And you can kind of see where the chain of events go. And it's kind of a lot leads back to a little bit what I just said a couple of minutes ago, where everybody thinks they are on their own in this little troublesome journey, where actually, if you kind of had this mini moment of epiphany and you looked at everybody else around you and you were like, oh, all these other people are having the same problems I am. Oh, does that mean that my problems actually aren't that special and bad? Oh, I'm just a very small fish in a big, vast world. A vast world of like wonderfulness and value and me allowing to serve other people. That like a little process of an epiphany in itself might, shake a lot of people into action.
Well, I think for me, it's about sharing.
Yeah.
It's not trying to hide, as I did for so many years, try to hide behind a facade, thinking that's what I should do and that's what the world expected of me, for me to be as accepted as a human being. Once I started being honest with people and saying, no, I have struggled, it's been really difficult. It's that almost like that Me Too movement. People then begin to risk sharing with you. Yeah, I've had panic attacks. I can't tell you the number of people I've had over the years and said, to start sharing how you feel with people. And they've come back and said to me, and when I shared it with my best friend, and when I shared it with they said they'd experienced it too. And with anxiety in particular, I say, well, why wouldn't they? Because it's part of our biological response. Yeah. We all experience it. How we interpret it necessarily is going to be different, but we all experience it. It's
interesting, isn't it? Because like, I'm pretty much repeating what I just said, but the fact that we perceive like our situation, and in our head it's this massive thing, and it's this big, like everyone uses the black dog analogy, it's this massive black dog that's following us around. But then the moment you realise everybody around you has the exact same black dog, this massive black dog all of a sudden is actually,
becomes a Pekingese.
Yeah, exactly. And like I was actually listening to I think it might be an audiobook, not a podcast. Yeah, an audiobook, and they were talking about how being outside in nature is one of a good solution and intervention for people with mental health problems. And the guy was like, well, why? Like, why does grass and trees make people mentally better? And he was like, it's not to do with the grass and the trees and all the loveliness and the physical. It's actually when you put yourself in the middle of the field, in the middle of nowhere, you actually realize how small and insignificant you are. And as counterintuitive as that sounds, when you realize that you're quite small in this big world, your problems become very small as well.
And also that when you are in that field or on that beach watching the sea, that you've got space. All of a sudden you've got space. It's that vastness of everything, and you don't have that pressure to be. You can just be you. And when we're surrounded by people, we get caught up in the who should I be? What do I need to be doing now? It's the busyness.
Like modern day society is very much like a very pressure cooker environment. Which actually segues very nicely into what my next kind of trail of conversation is. One of the best discussions and quotes that I've ever heard around mental health is that why in modern society now, where everything seems to be getting better, there is less conflicts, there is less equality, there is less illness, we are performing way better as a species on pretty much most markers, apart from mental health, where that's the one area we seem to be going backwards. Now, why do you think that is?
Gosh, that's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, like we spoke about it before in the past, and I remember one of the things that I always said is, actually, is it getting worse, or is it just becoming more spoken about? Or is it 50-50, a combination of both?
I think more people are able to admit to it. More people are recognizing that they don't have to suffer as they did. The accessibility of psychological therapies obviously has gained momentum, certainly in the past 30 years since, I first entered into therapy. It's so hard, isn't it? Because social media, the news, our world has just shrunk from a time when I remember where, you may get news sort of 2 or 3 days later, it feels like, from the world. Everything's immediate. Everything surrounding us. We're aware of all the wars, all the famine, all the poverty, all the distress, all the, racism. We have it all on our news feeds 24/7. So we're constantly bombarded with all the terrible things going on in the world. We don't tend to be bombarded with all the lovely things going on in the world. We tend to be bombarded with the terrible stuff, which is very detrimental to our sense of well-being, because we're given all this information, but we can then feel very overwhelmed and powerless that we can do anything about it because we feel so small, our voice isn't big enough, other people seem to have massive control. And although in many ways we've improved, that there are more access to psychological therapy, there is more talk about understanding, people's well-being, mental health, what impacts it. Actually, we have all this knowledge, but then we have all this other stuff bombarding us at a vast rate of knots as well. Plus all the stuff on social media about how we should be, how thin we should be, how tall we should be, how slim we should be, what sort of teeth we should have, what sort of face shape we should have, what sort of bottom. It's just...
it's...
in our faces all the time. And it's almost like it doesn't give us time to breathe, to think, is that who I want to be? Or how do I want to be? Because the next wave comes and the next wave comes.
I think, what I want to say...
I don't even know whether I answered your question.
No, you did. I think what I want to say is my 2 cents to that is we've gone from being a very big fish in a very small pond to the very small fishes in a very big pond. But we are now small fishes in a big pond, but we are only allowed to look at that rest of that big pond through a very specific lens. So we just said 5 minutes ago, how actually now, acknowledging how small we are in this world is quite liberating. But it's not liberating when you have to look at it through news feeds and social media, where you're just looking at, part one of that is you're only looking at the negative things that are happening in the world. So you're constantly being reinforced that, actually you're pretty rubbish. All this stuff happening around you, probably you've contributed that in some way, be it racism, be it coronavirus, be it, whatever, be it poverty, in a way, subtly, maybe, it's inclining that you've had some sort of contributing to that. And on the other side of that, when you get social media and all the other different platforms that we've got now, you're looking at that through a very specific lens of, that's everybody else's highlight reel. What you don't see is like with my business now, for example, everybody sees me standing in my gym gear, personal training, looking like I've got the best job in the world. What they don't see is the endless hours I spend on my laptop, programming and writing emails and filming videos and all the sorts of, people will see this podcast. What they won't see is the next 5 hours that I spend after this, when I've got to edit the video, I've got to edit the audio, upload it all, etc., etc. So we're constantly reminded of all the really good things that people have in their days, but then we don't have to acknowledge the bad things that people have in their days. And it's just an interesting and vast conversation. It's not one thing that can be answered in a 60-minute podcast. And I think one of the things I wanted to talk about as well is we spoke about before is how is actually the fact that depression is now more socially acceptable in a weird way part of the problem. And what I said to you before this podcast was, there are a lot of people out there who have a very inverted commas victim mindset. So these people may have had challenges at some point during their day in their life, which has made them very much feel like the world is against them, and now they have this label of depression and anxiety, and they for whatever reason they feel they need attention from the people around them, and they say, I have depression and anxiety. Whereas when they first acknowledge that, they may not have actually had depression and anxiety, they may have just been low, but over time that has in turn actually manifested itself into actual depression and anxiety. And I think it's a hypothesis that me and you spoke about before, and obviously that can come across quite insensitive. And I think, but then that does blur the lines between actually who is low or just struggling with something.
I think anybody that needs that attention is struggling.
Yeah, I suppose that
The fact that they even started, exactly, at the start, they felt a victim, and the only way they felt they could get the attention, have their voice heard.
Yeah.
You know, that cry for help is by saying, oh, I'm feeling depressed. That's a cry for help.
And I suppose that comes back to the point that I definitely wanted to mention towards the end of this podcast, is that actually having those conversations, the hard conversations that people will have with you, they don't have to come to you once they have depression and anxiety, do they?
No.
You can acknowledge that you've got challenges at any point in your journey, and you don't have to feel you have to label yourself or get labelled by someone else with this mental health illness for you to have to acknowledge those problems.
No, absolutely. I think anything that makes us unhappy, anything we're feeling puzzled about, or recognising that, you know, whether it be relationships, that actually our relationships never pan out the way we want them to pan out, or whether it be that we just know we always don't feel good enough, or, you know, whether we get defensive a lot of the time and you know, that doesn't feel great for us. I think anything that makes us feel ill at ease, you know, out of kilter, is enough for us to go and unpick, because ultimately, you know, I talked about this script. You know, we develop this script from the day we draw our first breath about how we are, who the world, you know, what the world is, how we fit in it. And we're reacting all the time as we're growing up to various different experiences. And what we don't realise, well, I certainly didn't, is that script, that woven together script has many, many layers to it. And how I think and feel about things is very much comes from that script that I learnt as a child. And what we perhaps don't then make the link is that because we made it from a child's perspective, perhaps that doesn't fit us anymore. Perhaps we can begin to look at it with an adult perspective. And often when we do begin to look at things with an adult perspective, we have more compassion for ourselves. We have more understanding. We can see why a child or a young person can develop a belief about something, but we as an adult can say, yeah, no, I can see why you thought like that, but actually, have you thought about it like this? And another successful way of working with it is how people talk to themselves. And I'll say to them, so if a friend of yours was in this situation, what would you be telling them? And when I say, so why, you can tell them and you can give them a very positive take on that, a very compassionate take on that, a very understanding and nurturing take on that. But we're talking about the situation with you. Why aren't you able to do that for yourself? So it's just highlighting for people how they're, I can't think of the word, sabotaging themselves through the critical voice, their inner critic.
Yeah, it's... I'm trying to get my words out here. It's that very much that, like, we are so quick to give advice to other people, and sometimes we kind of need to give advice to ourselves. Absolutely. Don't we?
But the compassionate advice that we give to other people, you know, we don't tend to give ourselves the self-compassionate advice. That
kind of like empathy and compassion process which we give to other people, then all of a sudden when that exact same thing happens to us, we just punish ourselves and get ourselves into
we're so much more judgmental with ourselves than we are of other people on the whole.
And that's kind of like, there's an irony in that, isn't there? Because so many people suffer because they think other people are judging them. Well, actually, no, it's just them judging themselves. So this kind of, again, segues nicely into the next question. What do you think for a lot of people are the main reasons they fall into these traps of depression and anxiety? What are like the main causes behind it? I know that's a very vague question because it's no one cause, but so people can process it.
Yeah, I think I said earlier, the script, you know, this how we've lived our lives as children growing up, we develop a vast understanding of who we are within the world and all our interactions and all those things that happen, whether we were bullied at school, not bullied at school, happy childhood, not so happy childhood, parents stayed together, parents didn't stay together. our interactions with everybody, all the events that have happened in our childhood form a view of who we are and what the world is like. For some people, the world is a very positive place, a very happy place. They feel very secure and can move forward into the world very confidently. For other people, it's a very scary place, and actually they stay close to home because it feels more secure and they feel safer. I think getting to that understanding, that, or even beginning to explore that if we're feeling low, what's behind that? What is behind that? You don't just feel low. There's always a reason why we're feeling low. In some ways, that might be very mild. As you said earlier, we might just have had a bad day. It's just not gone well, not how we wanted it to go. Yeah, we're a bit disappointed. Perhaps we said something to somebody that we wish we hadn't. We can wake up the next day and go, no, okay, that was yesterday, today's today. But for many people, actually, it's more of this is just confirming a belief I've had for all my life, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not doing as well as I should be doing, that people don't like me in the way that I'd like to be liked, that people don't love me in the way I'd like to be loved. This is just and they keep getting this confirmation. They think they keep getting this confirmation
to
that everything that's happening reinforces that underlying belief. Yeah.
So what I suppose, what about then the differences between something that's like rooted in us, like our script or an event that's happened in our childhood or later on in life, versus something simple, not simple because it's never simple, but a situation that's quite common, probably a better way to describe it, like a bereavement, a divorce, losing a job all of a sudden, and which is very relevant for so many people now. You can imagine the amount of people over the past 3 or 4 months that have been in this state of anxiousness and potentially depression because of the uncertainty around. So, what about that side of things where it's not something to do with our scripts? It's one of these common things that happens in life, but it's affected us really badly.
Well, I think the script influences it because how we feel about ourselves will be evolved through our script.
Yeah.
So the script influences it in as much as that if we believe that bad things always happen to us, it will just reinforce the script. Why me? I had a client recently, why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
Why am I suffering and everybody else isn't? That globalization, that everybody else is okay. Why have I been picked out for this? And when we begin to look back, we can see that he's felt that sort of victimization all through his life, that somehow, he's the only one that gets bad things happen to him. That's how he's interpreted things. When you begin to pick it apart, you can begin to see that might not be the case. So I think that, yes, we can't avoid bereavement. We can't avoid bad things happening to us, but our script and how we see ourselves will definitely influence how we cope. But it's not to say that feeling low and feeling overwhelmed and feeling frustrated is a bad thing, because it's just a normal part of existence. How we then learn to manage that and to look at it and to get the help that we need and reach out and explore those avenues is going to determine how well you get over this particular
it's kind of
circumstance. I'm probably not explaining that as
no,
well as I could.
So the way I've interpreted that is that all of us, to a certain degree, got this underlying foundation that supports pretty much the rest of our life. So for me, someone maybe have an amazing script versus someone else maybe not such a good script, we can both experience the same events, and these common events that we often, associate with low periods like bereavement, job losses, etc. But actually, for everybody, they're going to be painful on some degree. But because of some people's scripts that they have outlined for themselves, it's way more painful than it should be. The things like bereavement, they're always going to suck to a certain degree. But there's that point where we're going to look forwards. We're going to, let's say my brother, I don't have a brother, so that's a really good example. Let's say my brother died. There's going to be a certain amount of time where I'm going to be like, this is horrible. But there's also going to be that point where I look forward and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get on with the rest of my life for me and for him. Now, some people may never reach that point because of that underlying script. Is that right in saying that?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, then the way for them to, one thing I've always tried to speak about is being proactive versus reactive when it comes to mental health. For some people, they may have had that negative event that has triggered the depression off, like a bereavement, and the underlying script is not good. So that's then sent them down that road of depression, and that's when they're reactive. But what we can also look at for some people is actually being more proactive. So if you know that actually, some not so major things have happened in your life, and you've took it horrendously, like it's really damaged your self-esteem, you took it super personally. There's like, I was talking to a good friend of mine and a client the other day, and someone said to them, "Oh, you've lost weight. You look amazing," and their head went straight to, "Oh, what? So you thought I was overweight before?" As opposed to, "Oh, thanks, that's a really nice compliment." And that's a very small example. But that's also a sign for some people that actually I need to reevaluate, look inwards and identify what my script is doing for me, and maybe go and have an intervention, which would look like potentially therapy or something like that. Is that kind of a good way of explaining it?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
I think so.
I think that's really important for some people. That's one thing I always try to push, be proactive about your mental health.
Yeah.
Such a stigmatism around therapy.
And I think sometimes, as well with, we talked about bereavement. I think bereavement can take us to a place where, even if we've had the happiest of upbringings, can take us to a place where we almost feel unable to cope because we've never had to cope with anything this profound before. And it can make us doubt ourselves. Even, if we've got a very positive script, it can still make us feel. Years ago, I had a client who I can remember week on week, she thought she was going mad. She was terrified she was going mad because she'd never had to deal with this level of emotional trauma, I suppose, in her case, before. And I don't think we can ever say one size fits all. It's unique. You're unique. Everybody's unique. Therapy isn't anything, it isn't rocket science. It's somebody listening to you and giving you that perspective that nobody else in your world can give you. Because everybody's, your family and friends all want to support you, all want to, validate you and make you feel okay. That's not what therapists are there for. A therapist is there to give you absolutely non-judgmental acceptance. Anybody that comes in my room, believe you me, if half of them knew what had gone on in my life, they'd realise they have no need to worry because I've made some monumental decisions in my time. But it's that realisation, do you know what? It doesn't matter what you've done, you've said, how you've behaved. We're here because you're unhappy. And if you're unhappy with the world the way it is, let's find out why.
Yeah.
Let's find out and unpick what's not working for you, and let's find a way that you feel comfortable moving forward. And you can tell me anything, and it's absolutely within this room.
It's kind of like an unraveling process, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, so many people that one thing that's not really spoken about is that our internal dialogue, we are constantly having conversations with ourselves in our head. And it's about, for some people, they're having these internal conversations and they're bad and they're nasty. And then those internal conversations and that ultimately what forms our perspective and then dictates our actions is what's making us feel this way. So the way I look at therapy is going at unraveling that internal dialogue with someone who is qualified to understand what that internal dialogue means. Because sometimes we have these thoughts to ourselves, we don't even understand what they mean. We're like, oh, okay, this is weird. Oh my God, now I look at things like this way, and so on and so forth. Is depression and anxiety and mental health issues something that is with us forever in varying degrees? We might have it a lot at one point, or it may get a little bit better and so on and so forth. Or is it like, inverted commas, curable?
Oh gosh, that's a loaded question. I think the general consensus is it can be. I don't want to say the word cured.
Yeah,
I think many ways people can go into therapy or just talk to somebody, a friend or a member of family, and can get through a situation and never have that dark place ever again. And that would be all they needed.
Yeah.
For some people, depression might be ongoing for a lot of their lives. It's a trigger point, it's a place that they go to because it's familiar. And they've never really learned how to unpick that. I think there's an awful lot can be done these days. I think medication has a huge, a big get my words out. A really important part to play. So if somebody comes into my room and I know that they're very depressed and actually there's suicide, the feelings that they don't want to be here anymore, which we will always check out how you're feeling. Or even if people aren't even saying they feel suicidal, but just very low and can't function, going to work's difficult, just getting up and washing their hair's difficult, then I'll be saying to them, actually, for the immediate time, let's think about going to your GP. Let's think about getting some medication just to lift you off the bottom. Because it's when you lift people off the bottom that you can begin to do the work. Yeah, because they're ready and they feel a little bit brighter and they feel a bit more able to cope with those emotions, those feelings, those events that have happened, which have created them to feel the way they do when they enter my room.
Yeah, I've always, I suppose, how I looked at it before versus how I look at it now. How I looked at it before is, and how you'd expect to look at it given the way it's portrayed in the media and online and whatever, is that it's like an illness. It's it's you have it or you don't. It's like illness, a cold, but unfortunately I don't think it is like that. And obviously it revolves very much around our psychology combining with our previous experiences. So the way I look at it is like a bit like a battery, or no, like a fuel tank is probably a better explanation. It can go up and down at varying points for our life. It's not something that you have or you don't have. We all have that capacity to some degree, but some people's fuel tank will just get right down to the bottom and get very empty. And that's the point where they need to go, okay, I'm at a point where I need to go to the petrol station, to use that, to continue with that analogy. Whereas that's why so many people have what I feel they have the fear about talking about it, because they think they're broken and they think they have this illness, inverted commas, and that it needs curing.
People see it as a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
And sadly, that prevents a lot of people seeking the help that they deserve to have, because it's available to them. It's not a sign of weakness. It is an illness. And if we think, there is a reason why they're ill. Things have happened in their life that have created them to develop a set of beliefs about themselves or about the world. And doesn't everybody deserve to talk that through and see, actually, can I see this differently? Perhaps it's not quite how I'm seeing it. Doesn't everybody deserve that hand reaching out to them to say, let me walk with you for a while? I do feel that what I do with clients is very much that I'm just walking along part of their lives with them.
Yeah.
We're walking together, we're having a conversation. I like to imagine I'm on a beach with them, and actually we're walking along, we're talking, we're unpicking it. And at some stage they will feel, do you know what, I can do the rest of my journey on my own now.
Yeah.
And we'll say bye.
Yeah. There's when you look at it like that, there's quite a big parallel to being a personal trainer for me. I don't take on a client to have them forever and to support them and get them on their journey forever. I take them so that I have them for a short period of time. During that process, we give them a kick in the right direction, empower them a little bit, give them the education and knowledge that they need, and send them off into the distance. That's kind of what your role is, isn't it? Which kind of brings us nicely to what are the main intervention strategies for people. We've acknowledged what depression and anxiety is. We've acknowledged how society is currently affecting that, and if it's getting better or if it's getting worse. We've acknowledged what are the main causes, so how we get to that place, and we've said that we have an underlying script that we've built for us that's influenced by events in our life, and we've kind of discussed a little bit of how we turn that around and flip it on its head to get ourselves into a better position, and how we can change our perspective on the world. So for someone who is like, okay, I can't do this on my own, I need help, and instead of thinking I need to go to the doctors and cure my cold, which you don't have, how do I intervene this process that could potentially go in the wrong direction? Where would they start?
Well, my first thing would be to tell somebody.
Yeah.
Because I think just telling somebody that you trust is the first step of acknowledging to yourself that you're recognizing that you're not living your best life, that there's a problem. I think from there, if you don't feel able to to call a therapist straight away, the GP is always a good place. They're much more understanding now. You still get pockets, but on the whole, they're much more clued up to mental health and the impact it has on us as a whole, physically as well. So it actually benefits them to get our mental health well, because actually we don't have so many physical ailments if we're feeling good about ourselves. They are a good point of contact. And I'm very aware that there are huge waiting lists on the NHS, but they are good to go to. They can talk through your options with you. They can, talk about offering you some therapy on them, or they may give you ideas about who else to contact. As I say, private therapists, they can advise you, or you can discuss the idea about any form of whether it be anxiety medication, whether it be depression medication. They're the places to go. Obviously, there are many places you can contact a therapist online. You just have to put in.
Yeah, I've seen quite a lot of that. That's kind of popping up quite a lot at the moment, isn't it? Where there is that whole process, but it's done online. You can do it for an app or whatever it might be. And
there are many good apps. Headspace and Calm are very good apps that I recommend to people. I'm sure there are many others that I've not come across.
What about when we talk about interventions? I suppose it's a very reactive thing. We're doing it when we're at our worst. What if we have the sense or inkling that we have the capacity to fall down this road? What could we do from a proactive standpoint to arm ourselves for future me?
Well,
or does it all come under the same thing?
Well, I think so. I think so. I think if you're really desperate, obviously, if you are feeling that actually, do you know what, there is no hope left, then we have to think about Samaritans.
Yeah.
Samaritans are brilliant in listening and guiding us, and recognizing you're acknowledging there's a problem, and they can help you, suggest to you how you may go and get the help you need. But I think talking to somebody initially, telling somebody how you feel, is a really good first step, whether that be mum, dad, brother, sister, friend, stranger. Acknowledging that you are not feeling great.
And often that's probably the hardest thing to do, isn't it?
Exactly.
I was talking to someone about the gym the other day, and the hardest thing with the gym is actually getting to the gym. The rest kind of works itself out.
Once you're there, you're fine.
Yeah, and I think a lot of a big part of that process is turning around and going, okay, something's not right. And once you've done that, acknowledging that actually everything after that's probably going to be a little bit easier than that very first step. What about, we spoke about therapy, spoke about antidepressants, spoke about potentially looking at it from a proactive standpoint. Me and you spoke in great lengths about exercise and the relationship between the body and the mind. We look at our physiology and how our body works, and our psychology and how our mind works as two very separate things. But you acknowledge very early on in this podcast that our body is this giant intertwining can of variables that massively influences different parts. Do you think exercise could be a successful intervention strategy?
Oh, absolutely. I think anything that makes you feel you're being proactive is good. I mean, it's one of my explanations to people about, people think that from the head up it's all mental health, and from the neck down, we're physical beings down, but actually they're all connected. Yeah. And actually how we think and feel affects, whether we feel right running down the street or just slumping in a chair. Physical activity does help all those endorphins that help us feel better about ourselves. I know from my own personal experience, as when I first met you, I had a lot of weight to lose. I was my health was really struggling, and I was really struggling with doing anything proactive. The more I exercise, the more I gain strength. Just gaining muscle, just gaining strength in myself was a powerful tool for me to want to move forward with that. And we know I've been relatively successful in that. I just feel better in myself. My physical health's improved incredibly. I haven't been to the doctor half as much as I would have been before with various ailments, because exercise has strengthened me, not only physically but mentally as well.
There is definitely kind of a big relationship between the two, and like I said, like we're in this giant. Our body is like one system, like the engine is within a car. It still intertwines and has a relationship with all the different parts of the other parts of the car, and like you said, we stimulate endorphins when we exercise. We stimulate dopamine. We stimulate serotonin, which is something you mentioned at the start, which has a massive influence on how we feel overall. We can all do that through exercise. I think the process of that, like, self-love process, which we spoke about, of being nicer to ourselves, exercise is a way of doing that, and that's how I look at it. People very much look at exercise as this, like, hour of punishment of, oh, I'm going to go and lift weights and get jacked, when actually it's a way of giving back to ourselves within the day.
And I know you see it like that.
Yeah.
I still look at it as I've got to go for an hour's punishment, but how I feel when I've done that, and what I get from that, and how I've improved. As you know, I had a terrible back problem, where I'd regularly be out of action for days. I don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
But I always leave sessions feeling great. I've achieved that. I'm proud of the fact that I made myself do that. I'm proud of the fact that I overrode that part of me that was going, oh my God, this is going to be hard. I'm really proud of myself that I had the confidence and the self-discipline to say, come on, this does you good.
And one of the things that I picked up on, and you said at the start when we were talking about anxiety, is how there's that very much the fight or flight, and that very much physical reaction to anxiety. Your palms go sweaty, your speech stutters, your heart rate starts going. That's all physical things. Do you know what I mean? And then you look at the flip side of that with depression. People, you can often pick up telltale signs of people who are depressed because their shoulders round forward, their chin is looking down, their gaze is down, they can't make eye contact. All very physical things. So that's enough evidence to note that there is a big relationship between the mind and the body. And I've got a client who's been through some serious challenges in her life, and she always says that exercise has been her rock. And she was introduced to exercise just at the right time. And she often say she wasn't introduced to exercise, she may not be with us today. But don't get me wrong, there is a time and place for that. And I'm not saying that exercise is the only solution. Obviously, I have my biases. I come from that world.
No, but we are human beings. We are built for physical exercise. Our bodies function well at their optimum, when we are fit and healthy. And part being fit and healthy is not only what we eat and, what we put in our bodies, but actually how we move and use our bodies. That has a huge impact on our well-being, because we are like machines. You're right. You're right. We are built to function like that.
People love to use the word fitness, but like the fancy definition of fitness in biology is an organism's ability to meet the demands of its environment. Our mental health has a massive involvement in meeting the demands of my environment. I don't care if I've got massive quads, massive biceps, I can run for miles. If I can't look at a situation and process it and act upon it and take action, then my fitness is going to be absolutely pants. And the reverse is true. I can't expect my mind to be optimal if my body isn't optimal.
Absolutely.
That's a very two-way street, and that's how I look at it. Okay, let's kind of start to wrap this up now. If somebody is really, really struggling right now, they're listening to this and they're like, this is me, what do I do? Where do they go? What's the first thing they should do?
I think the first thing they should do is to reach out and tell somebody how they feel. If they reach out and they don't get that hand of friendship, or they feel that somebody doesn't understand them, don't let that put you off. Go to your GP. If you feel that actually your depression is out of control or your anxiety is out of control. There are always things that can be done. Embarking on therapy, and GPs now will always suggest some form of therapy because it's very helpful. There are loads of private therapists out there, who are all doing a great job with people who are recognizing that by talking to somebody, it's not that, all has to be deep and deep and deep. It can, we have a laugh in therapy, we have a cry in therapy. I am just somebody, all therapists are just somebody who are there to be with you, to unpick whatever's not working and to help you put it back into a way that feels comfortable. It's not a scary process. It's there, you can be in an environment where you feel comfortable for an hour and you can talk to somebody who you're not going to see in the street, you're not going to bump into regularly. you can sort of leave it in that place. My room is my safe space.
And one of the battles I've always faced, and I've recommended it to people, is the cost associated with it. But hopefully what people can take away from today's podcast is that actually, there's not much else that's more important than our mental health.
Well, I think
and
so.
If we can afford to, it's definitely a process that we should embark on.
I think so. And I think when we think what we spend on going out, or, something that makes us feel better. For instance, a lot of people who are depressed have a shopping addiction. Well, they'd be much better, if investing their money in therapy, which isn't going to last forever, whereas a shopping addiction can last a lifetime. Actually, it'd be amazing how many people do that. Or eat to make themselves, or drink a lot, to make themselves better. You invest the money in changing your mindset. You may only be doing it for a few weeks or months. Well,
it's a common thing that I always say with personal training when people have got barriers to it with anyone, not just with me, as I say, actually, yes, this is an investment in the here and now, but you're investing in future you. And what you'll probably get from future you is either you perform better at work, so you can potentially look at earning more money, or you end up saving money elsewhere because you make better decisions, not just around, like we always say, is exercise spills over into other areas of your life. Therapy is another process that will spill over into other areas of your life.
Absolutely.
If you can take control of things a bit more, take control of the little things like your spending habits and so on and so forth as well, and serving the environment around it a little bit better. If somebody needs help right this second, what should they do?
If they're feeling that low that they really don't know how they're going to manage to get through the next half an hour, Samaritans.
Cool.
GP, again, for an emergency, if they're feeling absolutely desperate. I know it's difficult in these times. Mind.org, they're a good site to go on. They direct you to the various different, sources of help. But I think if you just type in therapy, counselling therapy, you will see there are a vast number of people out there to help you. And
golden question, where can people find you?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I still don't know. I think if you type my name into Google, it comes up as a therapist.
Amanda Day.
Amanda Day.
Wonderful name. Thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this.
Me too.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to listen to this who are going to massively benefit from it.
Well, I hope so.
Good.
I hope so.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and have an amazing